So, let me tell you about the time my HOA decided to play hardball with me and ended up scoring one of the biggest own goals imaginable. It all began a few years ago when I purchased a beautiful piece of land. My property sat just outside a newly built neighborhood, a quiet little slice of paradise that technically wasn't part of the subdivision. The only complication was that the only way to reach my land was by using an old access road that crossed a small corner property the developer had originally reserved for future amenities. When I bought the land, my lawyer made absolutely sure everything was airtight. We secured a permanent, legally binding easement that guaranteed my right to use that road. The agreement was officially recorded and filed with the county. In other words, that road was legally my access route to my home forever. For the first couple of years, everything worked perfectly. The neighborhood was completed, families moved in, and eventually the HOA was formed. Whenever I drove through the community to reach my property, I'd wave to people and keep moving. There were no complaints and no conflicts. I even maintained the access road myself, paying for everything out of my own pocket. I had it graded regularly and laid down fresh gravel to keep it smooth. Honestly, my road was in better condition than some of the HOA's actual streets. But then a new HOA board was elected, and this group was, let's say, a little too enthusiastic about their authority. They were obsessed with control, uniformity, and making sure everyone understood who was in charge. Suddenly, the little access road that had existed long before any of their houses were built became their biggest issue. At first, they sent polite but firm letters. They claimed my use of the road created a security concern, and that it was an eyesore for the neighborhood. This was funny to me, considering I maintained the road better than their own landscaping crew maintained the community flower beds. I responded by sending them a copy of my legal easement and highlighting the section that clearly stated it was permanent and irrevocable. I assumed that would settle the matter. I couldn't have been more wrong. The letters became more aggressive. Soon they were calling me directly and leaving voicemails complaining about unauthorized access and the misuse of HOA property. It was baffling. They behaved as if I were some random person cutting through their backyard instead of a landowner with a legally documented right-of-way. The situation finally boiled over at an HOA meeting I wasn't even invited to attend. A neighbor gave me a heads up about it, so I decided to show up anyway. I stood quietly in the back of the community clubhouse and listened as the HOA president, who clearly had a bit of power complex, gave a full presentation about the problem of my access road. He even had slides prepared. He portrayed me as some outsider taking advantage of their community and insisted that my road was hurting their property values, which was completely ridiculous. Then he unveiled his big plan. The HOA would vote to reclaim the land the road crossed. They would revoke my access, tear up the road entirely, and plant a neat row of decorative hedges in its place. When he finished speaking, I calmly raised my hand. I introduced myself and explained that I owned a legally binding easement for that road. Removing it wouldn't just be unfriendly, it would be illegal. I even offered to sit down with the HOA board and my lawyer to clarify everything. The HOA president simply smirked. He told the residents that easements could be challenged in court and that their expensive attorney believed they could have mine invalidated. He framed the issue as a community versus outsider battle, and he whipped the residents into a frenzy. They became convinced they were reclaiming something that belonged to them. The vote to bulldoze my road passed almost unanimously. I walked out of that meeting angry, but also slightly amused. Did they really think it would be that simple? The very next day, my lawyer sent them a cease and desist letter warning them about the legal consequences of interfering with a recorded easement. They ignored it. Their lawyer sent back a dismissive reply packed with legal jargon that basically boiled down to, "See you in court." But they didn't even bother waiting for a court date. About a week later, I heard the unmistakable rumble of heavy machinery. I looked out the window and saw a bulldozer sitting at the end of my access road, ready to tear it apart. A couple of HOA board members stood nearby watching proudly, looking incredibly pleased with themselves. I just shook my head, walked back inside, and made a pot of coffee, because there was something they had completely overlooked. When the subdivision was first designed, the developers had made a particular decision. They wanted to hide the large, unattractive dumpsters used for the neighborhood's trash collection. So they place them all the way at the back of the HOA's common area, tucked neatly out of sight. And how exactly do the massive garbage trucks reach those dumpsters? Through my little access road. It was the only route wide enough and strong enough to handle those enormous vehicles. The neighborhood streets were too narrow, filled with tight corners, decorative curbs, and landscaping features that garbage trucks simply couldn't navigate without causing serious damage. But the bulldozer went ahead anyway. It ripped up the gravel, tore apart the packed roadbed, and left behind nothing but a long trench of churned dirt. To finish the job, the HOA sent their landscaping crew to plant a neat row of skinny little shrubs where my road used to be. Then they mailed me a smug letter informing me that my access had been permanently terminated. I didn't reply. I just waited. Monday was trash collection day. Tuesday was recycling pickup. By Wednesday afternoon, the phone call started. The garbage collection company contacted the HOA asking why their trucks could no longer reach the dumpsters. The HOA president told them to simply enter through the main neighborhood entrance instead. Apparently, the driver tried. He made it about 50 feet before realizing the truck couldn't turn without smashing a row of mailboxes and cracking the brand-new decorative sidewalks. By Friday, the situation had become a disaster. The dumpsters were overflowing. Trash bags were piling up around them, and in the summer heat the smell was becoming unbearable for the homes nearby. Residents started complaining loudly. The neighborhood social media pages exploded with angry posts and photos of the growing mountain of garbage. The HOA sent out a frantic email blaming the garbage company for being uncooperative, but the company refused to budge. They simply stated that without proper access, they couldn't service the dumpsters. They weren't going to risk damaging a truck worth hundreds of thousands of dollars by driving through streets that weren't designed for it. That's when my phone finally rang. It was the HOA president. His voice sounded far less confident this time. He tried to talk around the issue at first, mentioning temporary logistical complications and the importance of community cooperation. I just listened quietly while he talked. Eventually, he got to the point. He asked if they could temporarily reopen my old access road so the garbage trucks could reach the dumpsters. I let the silence hang for a moment before responding. What road? I asked calmly. According to you, that road was permanently terminated. You even sent me a letter about it. There's just a nice decorative hedge there now, isn't there? He started stumbling over his words, claiming there had been some misunderstanding. I cut him off immediately. There's no misunderstanding, I said. You voted to destroy my legal access to my property. You ignored my lawyer's warning. You brought in a bulldozer. Now you have a problem. And honestly, it's not my problem. Then I hung up. The fallout was spectacular. The HOA was forced to hire an emergency waste removal company using smaller trucks, which cost them an enormous amount of money. On top of that, the county fined them for health code violations because of the growing garbage pile. Residents were furious. Within a month, the neighborhood called an emergency meeting to remove the entire HOA board. The president and his allies were voted out by a landslide. The new board contacted me almost immediately. They were extremely apologetic. They offered to rebuild my access road entirely at their expense, and not just rebuild it, but pave it with asphalt and install landscape lighting along the route as a goodwill gesture. They also formally updated the HOA bylaws to permanently acknowledge my easement, so that this situation could never happen again. So now I have a beautifully paved private road, and the HOA's garbage gets collected on schedule every single week. Sometimes the best thing you can do is simply sit back and let people learn their lesson the hard way.